In Chinese history. Bianliang was soon tightly besieged by the Mongolian army, and the lives of the 2 million civilians inside were hanging in the balance. At this critical moment, the monks of Shaolin came forward. Led by their abbot, they marched to the Mongolian army, not to assassinate the Mongolian commander, but bearing Buddhist scriptures in the hope that through their teachings they could persuade the army to spare the innocent civilians of Bianliang city. Thanks to the courageous act of the Shaolin monks, after the city fell to the Mongolian army, the 2 million lives inside the city were spared. The leader of this peaceful march was Fu Yu, the abbot of the temple. Fu Yu's deed would be recalled by later generations with the phrase, Fu Yu saved millions of lives. One may ask how it was that the Mongolian army was so tolerant of Fu Yu. After all, he was allowed in and out of their camp, and eventually they accepted what he said. How was this legendary monk able to talk the Mongolian ruler around? It was all due to the abbot's unique life experience. The abbot went by another name, Hao Wen, and he also styled himself Xue Ting. The boy who would one day be an abbot was recognized as exceptionally bright when very young, so much so his neighbors called him a genius. However, due to his family's poverty, the genius child could not afford to go to school, and so instead he entered a Buddhist temple to become a monk. Later, he was invited by his teacher to take charge of Shaolin Temple. His teacher was famous, as he had served as the chief counselor to Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan's grandfather, and it was because of this connection that the abbot was able to enter the Mongolian camp and meet the Mongolian ruler. With the compassion showed towards all beings characteristic of a true Buddhist, the abbot was able to talk the Mongolian ruler around to his view. After Kublai Khan became emperor in the year 1260, Fu Yu, along with an established Taoist master named Li Zhichang, engaged in a ceremonial debate about the ways of Buddhism and Taoism, and Fu Yu's argument won much admiration from Kublai Khan. The emperor responded by entrusting Fu Yu with the management of all temples and monks in his territory, and all the temples in Henan province where Shaolin Temple was located were placed under the leadership of Shaolin Temple. But as great as he most certainly was, Fu Yu knew nothing about Kung Fu. The credit for the development of Shaolin Kung Fu belongs to an ordinary monk by the name of Zhe Yuan. Unlike Fu Yu, Zhe Yuan was a Kung Fu
While Shaolin Kung Fu flourished under the Yuan and Ming dynasties, the situation was very different for other schools of martial arts. So how was it that Shaolin could prosper while other forms of martial arts were suppressed and some even disappeared altogether?
As a people who excelled at horse riding and archery, the Mongols of the Yuan dynasty valued fighting skills much more than any previous dynasty. But ironically, in order to eliminate perceived threats to the dynasty, the regime banned civilians from practicing Kung Fu. Kung Fu masters were kept under close surveillance, and in some cases, entire schools of Kung Fu were wiped out. In the year 1285, by decree of Kublai Khan, authorities confiscated all weapons in the possession of civilians. The items to be confiscated were classified into 3 grades. Those of the lowest grade were to be destroyed, the middle grade given to Mongolian people, and the best kept by the government. Any civilian found to be in possession of a weapon of any kind would be put to death. Yet, despite this era of suppression, Shaolin Kung Fu went through a period of unprecedented development. The credit for this must go to Fu Yu, the abbot of the temple and former counselor to Kublai Khan. Because of Fu Yu, the temple enjoyed many privileges granted by the emperor himself, and so the general ban on Kung Fu and weapons never extended to the monks of Shaolin Temple. Instead, the temple became a sanctuary for Kung Fu masters from all over, and in the temple, they were able to continue practicing Kung Fu unperturbed.
就是少林寺的一个鼎盛时期。整个元朝少林寺的下院，就是说它下属的院非常多。光顾少林寺的下院的形成，为日后少林武术，尤其是明代少林武术的传播，可以说奠定了基础。因为这些寺院的僧人呢，都是相互交流的，也有寺院的僧人到其他的寺院，因为其他寺院到少林寺的下院，然后到这中心到少林寺，然后到其他的寺院，他们相互交流了以后，这样一个地方呢，其他的这些很多分院也成为当时传播少林武术的一个基地了。
Even though Kung Fu was banned by the emperor of the Yuan dynasty, it continued to be practiced by civilians. But it was a difficult time, and many styles died out, lost forever to future generations. In this dire situation, one reason the temple became so popular was because of the unique status of Fu Yu, the temple's abbot, as he was also advisor to the emperor. During the Ming dynasty, Kung Fu was banned throughout the empire, but Shaolin Temple was exempt. As a result, the temple became a shelter for Kung Fu practitioners from far and wide, and the Kung Fu practiced in the temple progressed rapidly. Despite the nationwide Kung Fu ban, Shaolin Temple actually promoted Kung Fu by establishing what we might call branch temples in other centers. But there was also another reason for the temple's popularity. The armed forces of the Ming dynasty were made up of regular armies and the militia. The militia received military training, and it was ready to fight side by side with the regular Ming troops. But while the monk soldiers of Shaolin Temple were part of the militia, they formed an independent unit.
在这明代军事体制下，允许存在的一支以僧人为主的特种兵。所谓特种兵呢，他们个人的武艺状态要比普通士兵要好。第二，他受命于国家，就国家允许他存在，国家也支持他存在，国家也调用他。为了能够随时随地的听命于调动，去参加战争，那么于是我们相信他们平常的主要生活是练武。 就相当于国家军队的训练是一样的，那应该在管理上、训练上，甚至于它的建制上，都应该是比较系统、比较严格的。
These monk soldiers then were part of the government's military structure, and their fighting skills progressed due to the esteem with which they were held by the emperor. To some extent, these monk soldiers were like a modern-day special force, always at the ready to take on the toughest assignment. Among the monk soldiers, Zhou You, Yue Gong, and Xiao Shan were renowned for their excellent service. On the mountain slope west of the temple is China's largest pagoda forest. In the ancient Indian language, the word for pagoda was Chaitia, but the word meant both a site of some important event during the life of the Buddha or a permanent resting place for one of his eminent followers. For many generations, this pagoda forest was the burial ground.